If you have your Bibles with you or you want to pull it up on your devices, let's look at John chapter 11. I'm going to take a look at a story that's fairly familiar. If you've grown up in church like I have or been around church very long, you've probably heard this story. So there's so much here for us, and so let me read to you part of the story, and we'll jump in and see what we're supposed to learn from it. John chapter 11. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Interesting side note here, verse 2. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now that's a powerful statement, the one you love. In other words, we probably can conclude that Lazarus and Jesus were very close friends. Lazarus was a friend of Jesus. And so that's what others would have said this. Lord, the one you love is sick. Verse 4. When he heard this, Jesus said, the sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. There's a prominent Broadway production that I've had the good fortune of seeing live 3 times in 3 different cities in the past, and then it was made into a movie in the Broadway production of Les Miserables. I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with it. So I love music, and so I've got the music and the sound, some of the sound tracks to maybe some of these musicals and some of the songs. And this particular song that struck me and is one to get out of your mind. It's a beautiful song, beautiful words, beautiful orchestration, all those things that I love to listen to. But you probably have heard it. In the production, there's a prostitute named Fantine. And she lived in somewhat of a tomb. We're talking about that today. Life in or near a tomb. Tomb-like living and what happens to us when we face it. She lived in a tomb of dashed dreams, disillusionment. Every dream she had seemed to be completely busted. It was a difficult time in history, the French Revolution. There was a lot of power, brutality, poverty, disease. And somehow all of this together took away the hope and the dream she had in her life. So the song is written, and then she sings this. This is her text in this movie. I mean, in the movie as well, and as well the Broadway production. I dreamed a dream in time gone by, when hope was high and life worth living. I dreamed that love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiving. Then I was young and unafraid. And dreams were made and used and wasted. There was no ransom to be paid, no unsung song, no wine untasted. But the tigers come at night with their voices soft as thunder. And they tear your hope apart, and they turn your dream to shame. I had a dream my life would be so different from this hell I'm living, so different now from what it seemed. Now life has killed the dream I dreamed. Hate to depress you right at the beginning of the sermon, but we'll go up from here, okay? I just happen to know a lot of people in this church who probably could have written those words. That's part of ministry. It's part of a church, and it's certainly part of a large church, which frankly to me is a great privilege. If it's got to be this, and with all the inconvenience or whatever it is for us at times, we sure get a chance to walk with a lot of people who feel like their dreams have been crushed, and that is an honor. Lazarus is one of Jesus' closest friends. His sisters, Mary and Martha, see him getting really sick to the point where they fear he's going to die. So she does what anybody would do in her condition at that point, her predicament. She sends word to Jesus, who's basically 2 miles away. Now, even then, that was not that long of a distance, although it would take a fair amount of time to walk those 2 miles, not like when we walk it or drive it necessarily. So she sends word to Jesus 2 miles away, the one who you love is sick. And now Mary and Martha were assuming a couple of things when they sent that message to Jesus. One, that he's only 2 miles away. Surely he's going to come by. How convenient is that? He just happens to be kind of in the area. They were certain he was going to come immediately. He didn't. There was another assumption I think they were making. The sisters knew he had healed others. Surely he would heal the one closest to him. He didn't. So Mary and Martha are disappointed, a growing disappointment, stunned. They kind of start saying things that probably most of us in the room have heard at one time or another. I thought you were a friend. Mary and Martha wondering, we thought you were like our closest friend and we were your closest friends. Philip Yancey's written a great book called Disappointment with God. It's been out a long time. I've quoted it a lot. So it's worth a read. Here's what he says in the book. Disappointment implies a hoped-for relationship that somehow has not worked out. Disappointment occurs when the actual experience of something falls far short of what we anticipate. And Yancey says in those moments we tend to ask three questions. Is God unfair? Is God silent? And is God hidden? Where is he? If only God would answer my prayer. If only God would just simply do some semblance of something that I've asked him to do. I'm crying out for help and I'm not hearing anything. Where are you, God? And then we begin to ask questions. It just furthers our disappointment with God. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to our family? Why is this happening to my child? Why is this happening in my neighborhood? Their brother Lazarus dies. Not only does Jesus not show up before he dies to see him or do what the sisters were hoping, maybe touch his body in a way that would heal him, he doesn't even show up for the funeral. He's now laid to rest in a tomb. And as you might imagine, Mary and Martha are stunned. We cannot believe he didn't show up. It's not like he was a week or 2 or 3 weeks journey away. We've heard from these sisters before. In Luke 10:38, Martha has welcomed Jesus and his disciples into her house. And others that were around, they're all sitting in the living room. We could just picture it that way. Her sister Mary is sitting at the Lord's feet. She's sitting there taking it all in, learning, listening to every word he has to say. Martha is the kind of person, and it's just kind of a side note here to see the difference in these two women and learn a little something here that I think is too good to ignore. Martha she lives by the rule that if you have a guest, you're going to prepare something. You're going to be a good host or hostess. That's what Martha did. We have no indication that anyone asked her to fix a meal, but Martha is in the kitchen preparing a meal. She's busy getting all these arrangements made because all those people are going to need something to eat. So, and we have reason to believe it could have been, 10, 15 people or more. Mary is fascinated with Jesus. She just wants to sit there and listen. And everything's fine until Martha wants Jesus to tell Mary to get up and help her. This is no slam on Martha. We get a chance here to see how God created all of us differently. And I just didn't want to let this pass. We have different desires. We have different gifts. We have different things we bring to the table that God will use. But in that moment, Martha wanted Mary to embrace her gifts, cooking and entertaining. Martha was a doer. Give her a task, she'll get it done. Mary was probably a little more introspective. In both scenarios we're looking at today, this one I'm talking about, and the other one when they're in the house waiting for Jesus to arrive after Lazarus has died, in both places, Mary's just talking to people. In this story, she's sitting at Jesus' feet, listening, taking it all in. In the next story, the story of our text today, she's in the house, again, with people. A people person. She really didn't think that much about entertaining the people, just she wanted to enjoy them. Please understand, Mary is not irresponsible, and Martha is not insensitive. This is just two sisters who are different. And I just thought it's worth catching that as we pass through here. The story of the death of Lazarus finds them again with a house full of people, consoling them, mourning with them. Martha hears that someone has spotted Jesus. He's coming toward the house. So Martha, being who she is, jumps up and heads out the door to go meet Jesus. And she is eager to see him, of course. And we'll once again see the difference here in how they approach it. Martha goes out to meet Jesus. Mary stays in the house talking and mourning and weeping with people. Martha sees Jesus first, and she asks the question, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's a big statement right there. And I suppose any other human being, Jesus knew what he's talking about. Jesus knew this whole story before it ended. But many of us, if we'd heard that, if only you'd been here, and that's an immediate kind of a guilt trip. Things would have gone so much better if you had shown up like we asked you to do. So Martha says, Lord, if only you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But notice Martha affirming her belief and her faith. She says, but even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. She was disappointed, but she still believed. Her faith had not wavered, but in her human feelings, her heart had been a bit broken. This hadn't gone the way she hoped it would. Once again, Martha has to go tell Mary. Mary's all caught up in conversation. And so big sister has to go say, Mary, Jesus is here. Will you please get out here? So Mary comes out of the house, approaches Jesus a little differently. Mary falls down on her feet. It says when Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. Two very different women, same question, different ways of asking it. And behind the disappointment here is this very real need they have, something they simply need from Jesus in that moment. And really, here's what they needed. Martha needed to know that Jesus was in control. Mary needed to know that Jesus cared. Same Lord, same circumstances, perhaps some different thoughts. I'll pick it up in verse 33 in John 11. When Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, they replied. Two powerful words. Verse 35. I would imagine I could successfully say it's the shortest verse in the Bible. Two words. Jesus wept. It's easy to kind of blow right by that one. Okay, Jesus wept. But we're told this wasn't just a couple of tears. This wasn't just some sniffling and wiping a couple of tears out of an eye. This was all out crying. Jesus wept. So much so that verse 36, then the Jews said, wow, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? They're all kind of wondering that. If he's so shaken up by the death of his friend, where was he when he was dying? I mean, everybody in the story, just like you and me, we are inclined to question God when something doesn't go the way we think it should go. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And he says, take away the stone. But Lord, Martha said, ever the one taking care of the details, she's still in full production mode. Lord, wait a minute. He's been in there 4 days. There's going to be a really bad odor. You don't want to do this. At that point you want to go, Mary, what do you want? I mean, you just said, if I'd only been here, your brother would not have died. I think you're thinking maybe that God would give me the ability to raise him back. He didn't say that. I would have. Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and he said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of these people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes, and let him go. What a great story. I heard a great message this last summer. I was up in Northwest Pennsylvania. Every year, I think most of you know, I attend a convention of some of my closest friends, and it's a gathering of the 400 of our African-American churches in our tribe across the country, our group of churches. We specifically have adopted 20 of them. They adopted me, really, and there's 20 of them that kind of are on our church's radar. We're invested in what they're doing around the country in communities where we can't imagine what it's like to minister in some of those places, but they do it well. One of these pastors a very large church, really just in the San Francisco area, and he was speaking that day at this convention. He was talking about Lazarus. And he made a point I thought was just cool. He said, it's important that you know that when Jesus was going to bring Lazarus back, he calls him by name. Lazarus, come out. Because had he not called him by name, everybody would have come out of the graves. It wasn't time for that yet. So he had to say, no, Lazarus, you're coming out. Lazarus, come out of the tomb. And he did. Why is this story in the Bible? I kind of ask that because we could kind of stop right here. Isn't that a great story? It's great information, true story. It's nice to know that. It just reminds us of the power of God. And that's all true. But why do we have this story? What is it, just so we will know it? Oh, that must have been cool that happened. Or is it because there's something here that we have got to take to heart? And that's where I believe we need to go. We have all had moments at the edge of a tomb, whether we knew it or not. It was a dark, lonely moment. We find ourselves in these moments hurting like we've never hurt before. Maybe we've done something we regret, and we know we're going to regret it the rest of our lives. Maybe something's going on around you, and you could not fathom you would be facing this kind of a situation. So we cry out. We're afraid. We're confused. We cry out, God, if only you would answer my prayer. If only you would get me through this. The Bible is filled with people who had those moments of darkness at a tomb, so to speak. Tomb-like life. For example, the Apostle Paul. In 2 Corinthians 1, 8, and 9, it's very tempting to think that Paul had God all figured out. But here's Paul saying this in 2 Corinthians 1. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships we suffered in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, in our hearts, we felt the sentence of death. That's a very eloquent way to say they weren't even sure they would live through this. In fact, the New Living Translation says, Paul says it this way, we were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. Right there at the edge of a tomb, some tomb life coming their way, unsure about what's happening. And they'd been out doing good, doing work for God, and yet they're having this moment. We're not the only ones. Think of Joseph, the story in Genesis of young Joseph who was hated by his brothers because the father favored the youngest son. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery and tell their dad that he died. And years go by, and you follow the story of Joseph. He'll be up, he was hired as a slave for this person or that person, then he's falsely accused, he's back in prison. It goes up and it goes down, it gets good, it gets bad. And then as this thing begins to culminate and come to a conclusion, there becomes a moment of restoration. When there was a great famine in the land, Joseph had risen to the top of the world of power, and all of a sudden he is facing his own family. They don't recognize him. He knows who they are. They're starving to death. They've come to beg for food. And the end of that story is they begin to reconcile. And here's what Joseph said. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. That's an amazing story. But have you ever stopped and asked or looked or done some research on how long it took to get from your brother selling you into slavery to when life is good and your family, you kind of get reconciled? You know, probably 25 to 30 years. That's a long time. It's a long time to wonder. It's a long time to deal with anger. It's a long time to kind of work through the fact that your brothers didn't want you. They assumed you were dead. They hoped you were dead. 20-some years later, maybe more. Think of Daniel. He did the right thing, made the right choice. Where'd he end up? In a den of lions. Think of Joseph running from God, which is never a good idea. He found himself in a different kind of tomb, a dark place, in the belly of a fish. See, the Bible is constantly reminding us that God can use any circumstance in our life, anything that's going on with us, God can use it for something good, as awful as it sounds at the time. God always has a plan. And yet we are going so often to our if-only questions. What is your if-only question? If only we hadn't moved here. If only I hadn't married him. If only I hadn't listened to her. If only we had more money. If only I hadn't have lost my job. If only we could have known about the cancer earlier. Those are our if-only questions we kind of pose to God. God, if only we hadn't done this, and now we're in a mess and we need your help. None of us like these moments of disappointment. Things we could never have anticipated would be a part of our story. And we've all asked the question why. We've all expressed our disappointment with our if-only questions when life is just not quite turning out the way we had hoped or dreamed or planned. And sometimes we'll get the chance to look back and understand why something has happened, or at least see it differently, or understand something that happens in life, and will help us be more sensitive to other people who are going through the same thing. We always can look back and remember, though, if we gave God a chance to show up, he does. And we'll remember that. We'll remember that he did come and rescue us. We have to notice Jesus as he approaches the tomb. As I said a minute ago, he is weeping, not tears, all out crying. So get this, the living word through whom the worlds were made weeps like a baby at the grave of his friend. N.T. Wright says, only when we stop and ponder this will we understand the full mystery of John's gospel. Only when we put away our high and dry pictures of who God is and replace them with pictures in which the living word who is God can cry with the world's crying. That's when we'll discover what the word God really means. Great statement from theologian N.T. Wright. And I think this story may be in the Bible. Why is it in the Bible? Why do we have it? Why are we reading it? Why are we talking about it? Because I think it's good for us to know that when we're weeping, God's weeping. When we hurt, he hurts. When we grieve, he grieves. When we wonder where he is, we find out he's been there all along. He never left our side. It may take a while to see it, but you hold on and you'll find him. He'll make his presence known, and you'll find out he was always there. I could go through story after story after story of things that I've experienced with people through the years when I've said to them, you're going to get through this. Now, there's a right time to say that and a wrong time to say that. But there's times I can honestly say, I come back around, I can say, I don't know how, I don't know when, you're going to get through this. You've got a church, you've got the power of God in your life because you've invited him there. You will get through this. Although right now, you probably would rather die than have to deal with this another day. And I've seen time after time after time. I remember the first time we had a child die in this church. This is probably 25 years ago. I was a young pastor then. I'm an old pastor now. And so it was a tragic thing. A child got hit by a car. And I'll never forget walking into the funeral home that evening. The service would be the next day at the church. I'd never seen a casket that little. I wasn't ready for that. And I didn't feel like much of a pastor that night. I kind of felt like a loser because all I could do when I walked in there, well, I didn't get to be pastoral. I didn't get to be strong. I just cried. So I just cried with them. Thankfully, it was enough for that moment. And I wondered, how will they ever get through this? And I'm sure they were asking if only God had prevented that car from being in that moment at that time, in that place. Or I remember the time, you talk about seeing people in pain. This particular one was someone who we had no idea there was anything wrong. She sat on the second row of the sanctuary service. She was a professional. She seemed to have life all together. She'd been with us for quite a number of years. Always walked in with a Bible. And I'll never forget the Monday morning. I'd just seen her in church 24 hours earlier. We get a call. She took her life. And I thought, how could she have checked out? What was going on? What was her if only? What was her dark moment next to a tomb? What went wrong there? She's less than 20 feet from me in church. And whatever was going on in her life, she decided she just couldn't cope any longer. Now, I don't know what kind of troubles and trials we deal with in this room. Those are probably extreme cases, of course. But I still will tell you that I've been able to say to families, and when I quit crying occasionally, I can say to them, you will get through this. Because see, now I've watched a lot of people go through stuff like that. They will get through it. We're going to help them get through it. They don't need to hear that maybe right now when the pain is still so raw, but they need to understand, I will guarantee, I can promise you, you're going to get through this. I don't know how I don't know how it's going to go. I'm not sure what God's going to bring into the picture to help you, but I have no doubt in my mind you will get through this. No doubt. Many theologians draw from this story that Jesus is giving thought to his own death and resurrection. Resurrection will be this glorious defeat of evil, an incomprehensible demonstration of love for us, to take on all of our sin once and for all, final blood sacrifice needed. Try to get your mind around that one. But before this awesome resurrection, when Jesus can walk out of that tomb comes, there's got to be a brutal death and 3 days in a tomb. And as Jesus wept for his friend, in essence, we're getting to watch what the Bible calls the man of sorrows, acquainted with grief and pain, sharing and bearing it to the point of tears. I wonder if anyone standing there could have even recalled Isaiah 53, where it says about this Messiah, surely he has borne our griefs. Surely he has carried our sorrows. One of my favorite things around here, of course, next Sunday I'll tell you 3 more favorite things I have, but like my favorite verse, Today this is my favorite verse. Next week I'll have another one for you. I love doing newcomer classes. I love meeting people, welcoming them to a church. A lot of people come into a church this size with all kinds of questions or maybe assumptions. We had a class last Wednesday night. It was a good class, a lot of people. Got another one today right after this service. I'll be out in Edmond and meet those newcomers. I love doing that. Usually I'll hang around until everybody who has questions or just wants to chat or just get connected somehow until everybody's gone and I get to meet them. There was a couple last Wednesday night in the class. And what the first thing that struck me is when they mentioned they live way south of here in Midwest City. They've been coming to church since last August. Said, you drive all the way from Midwest City? There's some good churches down that direction. I'm not going to tell you where they are, but there are some good churches. So that was that. I went home, and Kim always knows those Wednesday nights or those Sunday afternoons are always great with me because that's one of my favorite things. There was a couple, Gail and Jack. I met them. Well, the next morning, Thursdays, I'm studying, and I'm trying to hunker down and stay stay to my task and not come out of the cave, my cave back there called an office. And so I come out every now and then to take a break and check in, see if there's anything needed, any messages. Well, I walked out of the study towards noon last Thursday, and my assistant said, there's a book left for you at the front desk. She was in your newcomer class last night. I said, oh, okay, that's great. And she had it, and so I said, okay, I'll go put it in the study. And I get that quite a bit, and I try to browse most of them. Some I can get time to read, or it works out that it happens to be on a particular path of thinking that I happen to be dealing with. But this one, it's not a really lengthy book. She's self-published, and it's called it was called My Journey to Jamie, My Journey to Jamie. And there's this picture on the front cover of a looked like a high school girl who was in her cheerleading outfit. So immediately I'm thinking, well, I wonder if that's Jamie in the picture. And this is a book from the mother. And I wonder why she wrote about Jamie. And a few pages in, I found out she was killed in a car accident, 15 years of age, just going to lunch while she was in high school. 2 others died with her in this car accident in Midwest City many years ago. Her name's Gail Fry, Jack and Gail. I couldn't put the book down. One of the most incredible books on grieving and handling grief of all kinds. It's just raw. It's just straightforward talk from one who stood at a dark tomb in her life at one moment, literally having lost her child. It's a great book. Here's a quote, though, that I thought, you got to hear this one. Her name's Gail, and here's what she writes. The Gail that loved to smile and laugh and be with people more than anything in the world had gone. Here was a Gail that had become bitter, angry, and cold. A Gail that would run away from people that she knew and loved just to avoid conversation or contact. I had become someone I didn't know, she said. I mourned for Jamie and I grieved for Gail, for I had lost them both. What a powerful statement. From someone who will tell you it wasn't easy, and it still isn't these many years later, but that she in fact survived. She and her husband made it through that storm. God walked them through it, as hard and awful as it was. She will tell you God was faithful. Sure didn't feel like it at the time, but she will tell you that is true. I think Jesus is reminding us here that he'll reveal these tomb-like experiences we have for his purposes. And he'll show us how much he deeply loves us and cares for us in these moments. And I say constantly to people, again, I keep saying it, you'll get through this, or we will get through this. We didn't see it coming, we didn't plan. Thank God Jesus was kind enough to say to us, in this world, you're going to have trials of many kinds. I wish that wasn't true, but it is. I find myself wanting heaven on earth. And I'm reminded, no, heaven is another place for another time. This is earth. It's temporary, trial-filled, full of troubles. And it will affect us at some point in some way. I wonder, though, if those folks gathered around Jesus and Martha and Mary that day could have even reflected back to Isaiah 45, where it says this, I will give you the treasures of darkness, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. You see, God thrives in us when we finally realize we have nothing else to hold on to. I'll repeat what I said last week. None of us can know or predict the future. So why not trust the one who does? Why not trust the one who's with us every step of the way? The one who made us, knows us, understands us, knows everything about us, still loves us. Why not trust him? Why not start the year out with a firm footing in the hands of God to say, okay, I'm not sure what all this means. I don't know where it's headed. All I know is I believe enough to say, God, I'm going to trust you. Maybe you're saying, God, if only you would accept me because I'm pretty messed up. And you know what? He will. You don't even have to ask the question. He's waiting. Why not trust the one Who knows? And if you don't want to do it now, well, when do you want to do it? How much more life do you want to try to go in your own, on your own, fixing everything on your own? We're going to pray Isaiah 43, 1, 2, and 3. It's printed there on your note page. It's going to come up on the screens. I'm going to ask prayer teams to go ahead and come to the front of the room, and they'll be ready to pray with anyone who would need to be prayed for or prayed with. We had quite a response in the last service. And I had, if I ever doubted, is this the right message for today? I was quickly reminded it was exactly what was supposed to happen. We're going to pray this together, and then after we finish praying, the prayer teams will be here at the front, available to you, ready to pray with you. And I want you to know you can trust them. You can share your heart and mind, soul with them. They'll keep it. They'll hold it. Don't be afraid. Whatever you need, just please know it's available. Someone to pray with you and pray for you for whatever it is, whatever tomb-like experience you may be having. Let's stand together and let's say these words together. Great, encouraging words from Isaiah. It's going to come up on the screens, and it's there on your note page as well. Here we go. Let's read together. O Israel, the one who formed you says, do not be afraid, for I have ransomed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. And the people said, Amen. Amen. Go in the strength and power and love of God.